people. Extremists from Boko Haram are now terrorizing thousands of women with impunity. Good evening. Nigeria is Africa's richest and most populous nation, but in the north of the country, calamity reigns and travels in packs. Earlier this week, we focused on the war that has brought the threat of famine. Meanwhile, the Islamist militants of Boko Haram are ruining countless other lives. 2 years ago, they caused global revulsion when they kidnapped 200 girls from their boarding school. Those girls are still missing, but hundreds more are being kidnapped, raped, and forced into marriage on a daily basis. We meet one of them.
My time there was just horrible. I was captured for 5 years. They forced me into marriage with 3 men there. Because of that, I had 3 children.
Also on tonight's programme, an official inquiry says the London Olympics was corrupted on an unprecedented scale by the Russian team, with more than 1,000 athletes involved. And the MP who moved the Commons Speaker to tears with her account of being raped at the age of 14 tells us her message to her teenage self.
I would give her a big hug, first of all, and then I would say, it wasn't your fault.
And speaking fluent Disney, we have the extraordinary and uplifting story of Owen Suskind, who broke the silence of his autism by adopting the voices of his favourite Disney characters.
2 minutes in, this is our first conversation since he's 2 years old. 4 years of silence almost. And Owen, after a few minutes, all of a sudden clears his throat and answers me as who?
The evil Jafar.
What is Jafar?
2 female suicide bombers have killed 30 people and injured 57 others in an attack in the northeastern Nigerian town of Madagali. It's an area in which the militant Islamist group Boko Haram still operates, often with impunity. In 2014, they kidnapped more than 200 schoolgirls from the town of Chibok. Most of them have still not been found, and the abductions have continued. Our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson, has visited a camp in Maiduguri, where UNICEF has helped support some of those abducted. Well, tonight, Alex is back in the Nigerian capital, Abuja, from where he joins us now. Alex.
Yes, indeed, and that brutal attack today illustrates the very obvious point that Boko Haram are very far from a spent force. It is true they're being pressured by the Nigerian army, but this war is far from over. 2 girls dressed in school uniforms in a crowded marketplace detonating their devices simultaneously with those results. I suspect that death toll will grow to more than 30. But let's step back just a bit. It's important to get some sense of the sheer scale of the humanitarian disaster unfolding across Niger, across Cameroon and across northeastern Nigeria. The UN now estimates 14 million people are in need of humanitarian aid in the mid-term. Across northeastern Nigeria itself, 8.4 million, 2 million people displaced, and they're coming into these scores of camps every single day. Two particular groups enormously vulnerable. They are, of course, the war orphans, something which tragically happens in almost any conflict, but particularly in this case, the thousands of women who are abducted by Boko Haram. Tonight, we present 2 families with 2 emblematic stories in their words.
The desperate legacy of the Islamist Boko Haram rebels arrives at the camps across this region almost daily. Exhausted, abused, ostracized. This camp in the regional capital, Maiduguri, received more than 30 of them in just the past fortnight. They are the women, hundreds of them, kidnapped and forced into marriage by Boko Haram. For reasons that will be obvious, they can't be identified.
Well, my mum sent me over to my brother's house. It was early one morning. This car came up and these men got out and said, "Where are you going?" They said they were Boko Haram and had come to take me away. One of them hit me. The next thing I knew, I was out in the bush with them.
That morning was the beginning of the descent into something almost unimaginable. It would go on for years.
My time there was just horrible. I was captured for 5 years. They forced me into marriage with 3 men there. Because of that, I had 3 children. Then one day the men were fighting each other and I saw a chance to run away with the children.
Out in this terrain in the burning heat with little water and no food, it would be 5 days before they were picked up by a Nigerian army patrol. By that time, one of her children was dead.
Now, you'd be forgiven for thinking that at that point in the story, the hell is over, escape means escape. But sadly, in this part of northeastern Nigeria, when a woman comes out from the clutches of Boko Haram with children, she's merely exchanging one form of prison for another. And here's why.
I was rejected by my family and by my village. You know, it's only my mum who loves me and the children now. My family won't share food with the children. They say, these are Boko Haram children. Why must we give them food? The only reason they let me stay with them is because there is nowhere else for me and the children to go.
Captivity with Boko Haram is temporary. Ostracizing from wider society can be a life sentence.
Some of these women were actually married before they were taken away by Boko Haram. And when they managed to escape and to come back to meet their husbands even reject them.
At the end of the interview, in tears, this woman disclosed for the first time to Aisha, who was translating, that because of her captivity with Boko Haram, she's HIV positive. Aisha, a trained counsellor, went to work at once. Across scores of camps here, UNICEF has now supported more than 2,000 women abducted by Boko Haram. But as this vast crisis unfolds, largely ignored by both the Nigerian media and the world at large, another distinct group needs desperate help: the war orphans. Take just one family from thousands here. Kautimodu in the middle is 12. Her sister Hadisa on the right is 10. Both have lost their parents and siblings. Their cousin, Aisha Haram on the left, who is 12, has also lost her parents. The girl's uncle Makinta now cares for them, and he, of course, has lost his two brothers.
When Boko Haram came, everyone was just running for their lives. There was gunfire everywhere. I escaped, but my two brothers and my parents were killed. So we are the survivors. We're all that is left of our family.
So by some fluke of war, Uncle Makinta survives to lead the girls on into a new life, somehow. But even as we were here, another little boy turned up with nobody, too traumatized to be filmed. Alex Thompson, Channel 4 News, northeastern Nigeria.
Well, joining me now is Dr. Fatima Akilu. She runs the Neem Foundation in northeastern Nigeria, which provides therapy for those who manage to escape Boko Haram and helps them integrate back into society. And in a moment, I'll be speaking to the author Edna O'Brien, who just spent a month in Nigeria and saw firsthand the devastation caused by Boko Haram. She's writing a new novel about a girl captured by the group. Welcome to you both. Let me start with you. I mean, the scale is so extraordinary, and we had so much publicity about it 2 years ago when the girls were abducted from Chibok, and yet it seems to be going on. Nothing seems to have been done to actually alleviate the situation. Why is that?
Well, I think on the military front, there's been a lot of successes. Boko Haram no longer holds territory, as we all know, and they're no longer able to mount large-scale attacks, which is a departure from where they were 2 years ago. The problem now is with the thousands of people coming back from Boko Haram captivity. I think the scale of the problem took us all by surprise. We didn't think we would be dealing with tens of thousands of young girls who have been abducted by force, and also young boys, some as young as 5 years old, that are now coming back to communities that are devastated.
And when those girls come back to their traditional communities, how are they received?
Well, a lot of them cannot go back to their traditional communities yet because those communities have been destroyed. So the majority of them are still in internal displaced camps around the northeast. But
are they welcome back, or are they regarded with suspicion?
The ones that we have met have not been welcomed back. Unfortunately, they face a lot of stigma. There's a lot of rejection. In some cases, the girls are accepted by the communities, but not the children. Unfortunately, most of them are coming back either pregnant or with young babies. And there's a lot of stigma attached to those babies that were born out of captivity and really are the products of sexual violence.
And just explain why Boko Haram is doing this. Is this literally a kind of weapon of war? Is this a way of subjugating a community? Is it a way of trying to defeat the other side, of humiliating them? What's the point of it?
I think it's a little of all. Boko Haram really kidnapped a lot of young people to expand their so-called caliphate. So that was the strategy. Initially, Boko Haram was able to recruit voluntarily, but once the military objective became much more intense, they were no longer, and also the ideology was exposed for what it was, they were no longer able to recruit large groups, the numbers that they wanted, so they started to abduct by force. And we're now witnessing, with the decline of Boko Haram, with a humanitarian catastrophe, because a lot of these people are now coming back to communities. They're not only facing problems with displacement, but they have huge levels of trauma.
Dr. Fatima Akilu, thank you very much indeed. Let me turn to you, Edna O'Brien. Thanks for coming back on the programme.
Thank you.
What inspired you, what moved you to write about this particular region and these particular girls?
Well, I've thought about it since the time of the captivity. And in fact, it's more than 900 days, because there's an organization, as this lady would know very well, run by Dr. Obi, Bring Back Our Girls. It's a campaign. And when I was there, every day in the paper, the number of days the girls were gone. So for ages, I've thought, what can it be like? And then I read in the paper a few months ago, a girl found dazed, dirty, absolutely stunned, clueless, in the forest with baby. With baby. I thought, how is she going to survive? How can she feed herself? How can she feed a baby? How can she make the journey back? So imaginatively and factually, that's the premise of my story. But then one has to write it. So I went to Nigeria.
For a month?
For a month. And I feel an imposter when somebody has just been on who is living there. But I did absorb and see a great amount. And if you...
Let me just ask you, were people surprised to see you there, famous Irish novelist in Nigeria? Were they happy to talk to you, to open up to you?
It varied. The thing is, Nigeria it's a chaotic country in many ways. I met some lovely people. I met some totally wounded people. Probably the moment that lifted my heart most was being invited by two nuns who had a hall and had 30 or 40 girls to meet me. And it was a pre-Christmas party, so there was soft drink. And when I arrived, all these girls, all of whom are HIV positive, and some of whom have been in the enclave, in the camp, they were told my name, and there they were, clapping, welcoming me. They still had in their eyes, in their hearts, when you think of what you've just seen on the screen there, they had a zest for life that you cannot imagine they could have with what they'd been through. And that was so thrilling.
Do you think there's hope for these girls? Do you think they have a future?
There isn't great hope, as you might or I might understand it, but at least they're not being raped 5 times a night. At least they're not bringing babies up in a place where there's nothing to eat. At least they're not cooking meat with lizards and insects all over it for these men. These men regard these women as total pieces. Objects. They are sex objects, work objects. You asked the previous lady, why did Boko Haram take the girls? Well, first of all, they're sex slaves. That's very convenient. Secondly, they are ransom money. Just now, they released 25 girls, just now, a few months ago, 25 girls, or 26, were released with the aid of Swiss Red Cross. Big amount of money paid.
So there's a business model there behind
to Boko
it as well.
Haram, who will use that money to buy more weapons, to sack more villages, to kill men or recruit them and bring women back. I mean, it is a very, to use an old-fashioned word, shambolical situation.
And do you think, rather, what do you think should be done so that the world takes more notice of these women?
Well, this woman, Dr. Obi, had begun this campaign, and of course we all read the number of days it is, but no one tells you the actuality of what their reality is as you and I speak now. That is what I am trying to do. It will take me 2 years. That is what I want to do. Because just hearing a fact or a figure is no help. You want to live inside the minds and souls and racked bodies of these girls, and that's what I hope to do. What I did find that it's territorial. Everyone wants territory.
I'm afraid we have to leave it there. Edna O'Brien, thank you very much indeed.
Thank
Dr.
you,
Fatima Akilu, thanks
Thank
as well.
you very much.
Kathy.
Thanks, Matt. Now, remember the summer of 2012, that heady month of the London Olympics when the sport seemed so clean and pure? Well, an official investigation into Russian doping practices revealed that the country's Olympic team corrupted the London Games on an unprecedented scale. That's a quote. Over 4 years, from 2011 to 2015, the doping programme grew into an institutional conspiracy involving more than 1,000 athletes. Russia denies the claims, but the evidence is strong, as Jordan Jarrett Bryan reports.
The London Olympics were meant to be the highest point in British sports history. Instead, it's been tarnished by one of the biggest sporting scandals of all time. Today's verdict on Russian doping from Professor McLaren was damning.
It is impossible to know how deep and how far back the conspiracy goes. For years, international sports competitions have unknowingly been hijacked by the Russians. Coaches and athletes have been playing on an uneven field. Sports fans and spectators have been deceived.
The latest findings implicate more than 1,000 Russian athletes, many of whom were medalists from the Summer, Winter and Paralympic Games between 2011 and 2015. That includes the 2012 Olympics, where several Russian athletes were found to be cheating. The Russian team won 82 medals here at the 2012 Games. 10 of their athletes have since had their medals stripped. Professor McLaren said the Russian Olympic team had corrupted the London Games on an unprecedented scale, the extent of which may never be fully established. The Russian doping allegations were already out there, and today we got more evidence to support the claims of state-sponsored doping, sample swapping and FSB agents posing as sewage engineers. The methods outlined in the report were staggering. Salt and even instant coffee granules were mixed with samples to try and fool the testers. They even tried the biologically impossible.
2 female hockey players' samples contain male DNA. Scientific impossibility. 8 Sochi samples revealed salt content not physiologically possible in a healthy human.
Despite the extensive dossier, Russian critics are defiantly dismissive of McLaren's findings.
The person who loses will grab any possibility to say that it was not him who was weaker, but there was cheating on the other side, so it just makes me laugh.
Today, the IOC has sanctioned retesting of all Russian samples from both the London and Sochi Games. But with doping evidence found across more than 30 sports, including football, many are questioning Russia's credibility to host the other giant sporting event, the World Cup in 2018.
Jordan Jarrett Bryan. Now, Russia is claiming that just 7% of East Aleppo remains in rebel-held hands as Syrian government troops continue their advance deeper into the city. It says that 10,500 people have left the besieged area in the past 24 hours. But the United Nations Human Rights Organization says that tens of thousands are still trapped inside, used as pawns by the competing forces. Diana Magne has this report.
12 days ago, the trickle became a stream, then a mass exodus. Small gestures waving the Syrian flag might just be the things which guarantee safety in the brave new world of the freshly displaced, carrying what they can, freed from siege, facing life under Assad. Because life under regime bombardment has long been unbearable. This video sent to us from a resident of the rebels' shrinking enclave earlier this morning.
You can notice this smoke, which means there are some people still living downstairs. They are burning wood so that they can stand the cold weather. It's sunny today, yet it's very cold. Clashes never stops. Clashes never stop.
But eastern Aleppo's various rebel factions aren't done fighting yet. In the shattered remains of Aleppo's old city, now under government control, young boys tell of trouble on their way out.
بيت أرض عنا بناء باركنا تحت في الأرض التزمنا بيوتنا وشفنا الجيش عم قدام اجينا نطلع ما يخلونا
قلتوا كنتوا تطلعوا لعندهم مشان تطلعوا معهم إنه تهجموا علينا.
During the last 2 weeks, Fatah al-Sham Front, formerly known as al-Nusra Front, and the Abu Amara Battalion are alleged to have abducted and killed an unknown number of civilians who requested the armed groups to leave their neighborhoods.
But no side in Syria's war plays fair. The UN warning 2 of hundreds of men reportedly gone missing after crossing into government-controlled territory.
Given the terrible record of arbitrary detention, torture and enforced disappearances by the Syrian government, we are, of course, deeply concerned about the fate of these individuals.
The eventual loss of Aleppo will weaken the opposition, but the revolutionary spirit lives on. In rebel-held Ghouta, east of Damascus, demonstrations on behalf of their embattled brothers in the north. And it's not just eastern Aleppo where humanitarian aid is blocked. According to the UN, there are just under 1 million people living in 16 besieged areas across Syria. Most are in the country around Damascus, then further north around Homs and in Idlib province, and Deir ez-Zor, which is controlled by so-called Islamic State. And there are another 4 million people in areas the UN calls hard to reach. These children from Aleppo may now have food and have fled the battle in their neighbourhoods, but they have not yet fled the war.
A new opinion poll puts Labour 17 points behind the Conservatives on just 25%, its lowest standing in opposition since 1983. It came in the wake of the party finishing fourth in the Sleaford and North Hycombe by-election, won by the Conservatives with the majority of more than 13,000 votes. Our political correspondent Michael Crick is in Westminster. Michael, tell us more.
Well, it's looking pretty grim for Labour right now. This YouGov poll is the worst for the party since Gordon Brown was Prime Minister. You expect polls to be bad for governments, but this is also bad for Labour in opposition. The worst for a third of a century, coming after terrible performances in the by-elections in Witney, Richmond and now Sleaford, where the Conservative Caroline Johnson won very comfortably last night after a campaign in which her policy seemed to be to avoid questions from the media. Astonishingly, even after the result last night, that policy seemed to be being pursued by her minders who wouldn't let her answer any reporters' questions. Perhaps they felt she might say something embarrassing. It was also a pretty good night for UKIP under their new leader, Paul Nuttall. They came second in Sleaford, but you'd expect them to do well there because, after all, Lincolnshire was the most Brexit county of all at the referendum. And the Lib Dems continued their revival after Witney and Richmond, doubling their vote in Sleaford, despite the fact it is such a strong Brexit area. But the notable feature, the fall in the Labour vote from second place down to fourth place. True, the Labour candidate was a weak candidate. That's true of the Conservatives and Lib Dems. They were weak too. What Labour MPs are saying is Labour needs to make it clear where it stands on the EU. Nobody really knows whether it's still for Remain or still for, and now wants full speed ahead with Brexit or somewhere in the middle. The party needs to make it clearer, Labour MPs are saying.
Michael, thank you very much indeed. Well, joining me now to discuss the Labour Party, whether it knows what is actually going on or not, is the Shadow Minister and Brent Central MP Dawn Butler and Aisha Hazarika, a former advisor to Ed Miliband and Harriet Harman. Welcome to you both.
Hi.
Dawn Butler,
Hello.
let me start with you. I mean, this is pretty appalling, isn't it, these opinion polls, plus the results in the by-elections. It's terrible.
Well, the opinion polls are not great, but they never really are.
But these are really bad. I mean, we're 25% down.
But the by-elections, we never expected to win Richmond. In the latest by-election, they said that we would lose, the Labour Party would lose their deposit, and the Labour Party didn't. It's not the greatest result, but we had a great candidate. He was a local man, local bidman. I feel sorry that he's lost, but at least we were able to deliver Labour message in an area that is staunch Tory. And they lost a lot of votes too, remember?
It does look, though, as if you're being squeezed between UKIP on one side, parking its tanks on your turf, because you're not committed enough to Brexit, and on the other hand, you've got the Lib Dems who think you basically
not really. All parties
acted treacherously over Europe.
All parties lost votes in this election, so all parties lost votes, not just Labour. But what surprises me sometimes is the story here is it was a Conservative MP decided that he could no longer sit in Parliament under Theresa May and see what his government and his party's doing to the country. That really should have been the big story, and it didn't get the coverage that it should have done.
Aisha Hazarika, do you see it quite as kind of benignly as Dawn Butler does?
No, I think it's terrible for Labour, and I think we face a real danger of having a real existential crisis about who Labour is for and what we actually, what our message is, what we stand for. Now, we came second in that seat at the last general election. We came fourth. Now, I don't think it's a very good briefing line to put out saying, look, it's good news, guys, we didn't lose our deposit.
I didn't say it was good news, and it's not a briefing line either.
Dawn, let me finish, thanks. So the key question is for Labour, we didn't do well in Richmond, which is a metropolitan area. We're not doing well in our base, in a seat like the by-election. And I think everybody wants Jeremy Corbyn to succeed. He won that leadership contest, but people want him to have a clear message about what the party's doing. People are saying they haven't seen Jeremy Corbyn in quite a long time. And I do think, the country is crying out for a strong opposition. The country is crying out for a strong Labour Party. And our biggest danger at the moment is irrelevance.
I mean, it does look as if Jeremy Corbyn, in the last few rather dreadful weeks, has gone into a witness protection programme. I've hardly seen him.
Really? Did you not see him? I mean, at PMQs, he wasn't there because obviously the Prime Minister wasn't there. But if you look in the last few weeks, Jeremy has been putting in a really good performance in PMQs. Now, look, I'm not saying that the Labour Party can't do better or that we couldn't have clearer messages, but we wasted a whole year in the Labour Party because people like I've decided that you were going to have a leadership contest, and we could have spent that year looking at ourselves and making sure that people knew who we were and that we were strong enough opposition. So we've wasted a year, and now we're coming in, and actually the debate that we had on Wednesday showed the Labour Party working together in terms of holding this government to account in their plans for leaving the European Union, and I think that that's very important. So we can't just dismiss what the Labour Party's doing, which annoys me.
Steve Reid, the MP, your MP for Croydon North, has said Labour risks becoming the party of the 0%. This is a Labour MP.
But the big question for Labour is how are we, and nobody is talking about fighting now, because you're right, there was Labour, Jeremy won the last leadership contest.
Which was pointless, right?
I agree it was pointless. I'm not in the PLP, by the way, so it was not my rebellion. But the key question is, he's the leader of the party now. The party's got to move forward with a clear message. What is our position on key issues? What's our position on immigration? What's our position on the health service? What's our position on the economy?
Disagrees
and get
with
out
that.
there and sell the message, because at the moment we are not speaking to anyone. We're not speaking to the Remainers. We're not speaking
we also
to the
have to
Leavers.
talk about issues when we have an opportunity instead of always trying to knock the Labour Party.
It sounds like you have a lot of talking to do amongst each other and within the party, but we'll have to continue this another time. Thank you very much to both of you for coming in. Now, the Dutch far-right political leader Geert Wilders says he'll appeal after a court convicted him of discrimination against Moroccans. The charges stem from a rally in 2014 in which he led chants of fewer, fewer, fewer aimed at Moroccan residents in Holland. But Wilders, like many politicians on the far right, is bringing a new threat to the established parties and shifting the centre ground of politics. Here's Fatima Manji.
The face of Dutch anti-EU and far-right politics. Geert Wilders has been convicted of inciting discrimination against Dutch Moroccans for encouraging a crowd to call for fewer of them. Ever defiant, he issued a statement saying he speaks for millions of Dutch people. Although conscious perhaps of a global audience, he did so in English.
The Dutch want their country back and cherish their freedom. It will not be possible to put the genie of positive change back in the bottle.
He's channeling an all too familiar phrase.
Our message is clear. We want our country back.
We're going to take our country back from these people. We're going to take it back.
Nationalism and populism have had quite a year of success. But last night we heard from one of the losers. David Cameron, in his first speech since resigning, said the rise of populism had cost him his job.
Where do we go from here? And obviously the first question that you ask in response to that is, how on earth did we get here?
He believes globalisation and the pace of cultural change have created a movement of unhappiness. So what is it about populist politicians that resonates?
It's just a gigantic con for these. They attack the elites. They are just a different sort of elite. What's happened is that they've dressed themselves up as the voice of the common man and the common woman.
Some people will say that that began with the practice of news management, which you were engaged in.
The Brexit campaign, Boris Johnson goes around his red bus, £350 million a week to the National Health Service. Tens of millions of Turks are going to come in if you don't vote Brexit. Total 100% lies. This is so far beyond anything that was going on in the era that I was involved in campaigns.
Others argue these upstart outsider politicians outflanked mainstream parties.
They were just talking about jobs, wages, GDP. And voters were saying, for me, it's not just about global markets and free trade. For me, it's about actually my community and my values and my way of life that I feel, for whatever reason, are under threat by this rapid social change and this increasing diversity around me.
This week, Angela Merkel called for a ban on face veils wherever legally possible in Germany. A nod to fears about culture, but essentially adopting a policy from the populist far right. It is a sign of how the centre ground has already shifted.
Now, the president of South Korea, Park Geun-hye, has been impeached after a secret vote of parliament over a corruption scandal. Thousands have protested in recent weeks, calling for her to step down. Our Asia correspondent Jonathan Miller has this.
She's grovelled and scraped, but 4 apologies to the nation couldn't subdue the cacophony. Lock her up. From her sanctum, the Blue House, South Korea's first female president had offered to resign, asking Parliament to decide how and when. Her opponents said she was just trying to delay the inevitable. Today was impeachment day. The secret ballot subdued. The motion accused Park Geun-hye of extensive and serious violations of the Constitution. Her impeachers needed 2/3 of the 300 members. They got there easily. Nearly half her own ruling party voted to oust her. Her powers are suspended. The Constitutional Court now has 6 months to confirm her dismissal. By last Saturday, after 6 weeks of protests in Seoul, 1.7 million South Koreans came within 100 meters of the Blue House, baying for blood. The most unpopular president ever couldn't not hear the clamor. Links with her old friend Choi Soon-sil were Ms. Park's undoing. Last month, Choi was arrested on charges of influence peddling, colluding with the president to extort money from 53 companies. Those companies included big household names, the famed chaebol conglomerates, South Korea's corporate titans. One by one, the chairmen of Samsung, Hyundai, Lucky Gold Star and others faced parliamentary interrogation about large sums donated to foundations controlled by the president's friend to win tax breaks, cash for favours. By then, Ms. Park was in fulsome apology mode. "I deeply apologise," she said in this nationally televised address. In another, she said she was heartbroken by the wounds she'd inflicted on those who had trusted her. There's heartbreak in Park Geun-hye's own story too. She grew up in the Blue House, her father a military dictator. But both he and her mother were later assassinated. 4 years ago, she was democratically elected president, lauded by Psy, the king of Gangnam himself. In 2014, disaster. A ferry capsized and 300 people were drowned, most of them children. But the president was nowhere to be seen. She said sorry then too, but the damage was done and the downfall began. President Park was a hawk when it came to the north, hardline and tough in the face of missiles and nuclear threats. Now there are fears Kim Jong-un could exploit the power vacuum down south. Tonight, the man tasked with filling that vacuum, her Prime Minister, said he felt sad and, as an aide to the President, responsible too. And then, to mark the end of this sorry tale, from the Blue House itself, Park Geun-hye said sorry. Again, down the road, relatives of the children who drowned on the ferry felt they finally had something to celebrate.
Jonathan Miller reporting. Now, a convicted drug dealer recently released from prison has revealed to Channel 4 News the scale of the destruction brought about inside by psychoactive substances known as NPS. He claims that up to 80% of inmates in some jails are now hooked on spice and says that some prisoners are prepared to do anything to get hold of it, which often leads to violence. Our senior Home Affairs correspondent Simon Israel has this report.
He's a convicted drug dealer and served numerous sentences in half a dozen prisons in the northwest. But only in jail until recently did he witness the scale of destruction brought about by the epidemic of spice or mamba.
Seen 4 people die off it on this sentence.
4 people die in prison?
Yeah, off the mamba, yeah. There's nothing else to do in jail, so everyone's smoking it. It's easy, it's undetectable.
The grim, violent picture he paints has been uploaded on YouTube and documented time after time by prison inspectors. But he is testament to just how far the almost instant addiction is driven by a vicious cycle of boredom, lockdowns and debt.
When I first started smoking it, I was robbing people, swilling them with hot water, slashing them, hitting them over cups, hitting them over the head with cups. I was doing anything.
Slashing them with what?
Yeah, with two brushes with razor blades on. Just going into pads, putting blades to the neck and that, because I know they got a parcel up their arse, just to get that drug.
Who's controlling this economy inside?
The lads, you get people in there who sell it. People that usually don't smoke it. But then also you get people who do smoke it who sell it just to pay for their own smoke. I did that for a bit. But you just end up getting yourself in debt.
How much debt did you get into?
Yeah, I owed roughly about £1,200 in the last jail. The jail before that I owed about £800. The jail before that I owed about £900. Jail before that I owed about £850. So every jail I was in, I was getting in debt because they don't care. They just give you it, you know, and they'll keep giving you it. And then obviously it'll end up where they want the money, you can't pay it, so you end up slashing them, swilling them, hitting them with something just to protect yourself, and then you get chipped out then and it starts all over again in the next one.
He says around 80% of the men on the prison wings where he was placed were mamba addicts, but official figures belie his claims. They show just over a third of men said it was easy to get hold of drugs in prison. Yet detection of psychoactive substances, or NPS, has rocketed in 4 years, from 136 in 2011 to over 4,200 last year. And there are, at the very least, 58 deaths in prison now linked to those drugs. And then there's the violence, also now well documented.
I've seen people shout people to the gaps in the door. The cell doors there, they've got little gaps down the side. They've got a ruler in their hand with a blade on the end. Say they owe them £15 canteen, they get him to the side of the door, they be talking to him, why are you behind your door? Next minute, bam, ruler through the side of the door, cut his face. You know, it's just jail life.
This week, the Justice Secretary told the Commons they were looking at all kinds of solutions to try to reduce supply rather than demand.
But what we are doing is solutions such as installing extra netting. I was at HMP Pentonville last week. They've now got patrol dogs who are barking, which helps deter drones.
Is there any way of stopping this?
No, I wouldn't have thought so. You just need to try and wise the prisoners up, try and make them stay away from it. But
how are you going to do that, do you think?
I don't think you can. Well, if watching someone die in front of you isn't enough, what's going to change your mind?
He left prison with debts totalling £12,000. He's trying to stay drug-free, and it's working for now. But on the outside, he has to keep looking over his shoulder and it's for that reason we agreed not to disclose his identity.
Simon Israel reporting there. Now, it's not often that hardened members of Parliament are moved to tears by the speeches of their colleagues. But that was the case yesterday when the Scottish Independent MP, Michelle Thompson, intervened in a debate on violence against women to tell the Commons how she was raped as a 14-year-old. We'll be speaking to her in a moment, but first, here's a little of her speech.
When I was 14, I was raped. As is common, it was by somebody who was known to me. He had offered to walk me home from a youth event, and I remember, first of all, feeling surprise, then fear, then horror, as I realised I quite simply couldn't escape. Because obviously he was stronger than me. And there was no sense, even initially, of any sexual desire from him, which I suppose, looking back again, I find odd.
What she has said and the way in which she said it, which has left an indelible impression upon us all.
Well, when we spoke earlier, I said that she'd looked remarkably relaxed and that it must have taken huge courage to speak out in this way. I began by asking her what was going through her mind.
I mean, I can absolutely tell you I was not totally relaxed. I was absolutely terrified, particularly beforehand. But once I started, I mean, I was really just talking about what I knew to be true. I mean, obviously, I had tried, when I was preparing my speech, to write down all that I recalled and felt. So, to be honest, there wasn't really anything going through my mind as such. All I was doing was telling people my story, and I didn't even notice other people in the chamber around me.
What impact has this rape had on you over the decades? What toll would you say it's taken on your life?
I've just been aware, thinking about it, things near the time, say a few years afterwards, like I mentioned that sometimes I didn't go to school and I just stayed at home on my own and I read or I listened to music. I realise now, looking back, and the fact that I stepped back from some of my closest friends, who are still now my closest friends, and one of them had texted me after my speech and said, actually, I did notice there was something different about you. So the impact was different at different points in my life. Sometimes I felt that I was more angry in some situations than I should have been, which was one of the main reasons why I told my husband, so that he would understand that actually it wasn't about him, it was about something inside of me.
You've now reported your attacker to the police.
Yes.
A lot of people might question why you didn't do that at the time, all those years ago.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and absolutely, that's a fair question. And one of the things I was really trying to emphasise in my speech, that particularly at that time, the sense of shame I felt and how much I blamed myself and how much that stopped me because I was afraid about what people would say about me. Now, how can a 14-year-old girl at that time, I mean, I said I didn't really think I understood what rape was. How can a 14-year-old girl understand what might the risks be and what's going to happen and understand all that stuff I mentioned about do you take flight, do you fright, or do you freeze? I froze, and that is the most common reaction for women.
You've had an enormous response to your speech from the Commons Speaker in tears to people on Facebook, Twitter and so on. What has been the response that's most moved you, that's most affected you?
I've had some very personal emails from people who've made themselves known to me, and I suppose the ones that have moved me the most is women of a similar age to me who have bottled it up as long as I have, and it's given them the confidence to go and share that experience, or even the fact that it happened with somebody that they've had as a life partner. That's been absolutely fantastic.
Finally, if you had face-to-face with you now, your 14-year-old self, what would you say to her?
I would give her a big hug, first of all, and then I would say, it wasn't your fault. I would tell her that I loved her and that I would do everything I could to support her, and I would do all the things I should have done at the time. I should have told my mum, and I'm really sorry, Mum, that I didn't tell you. I would have told my dad, and I would have trusted that things would be better. I would have still been scared, because this is, even for me, this is a really, really scary thing to do. But we only make things better by talking about it. And I really hope that that comes out as a result of this.
The MP and rape survivor Michelle Thompson speaking to me earlier.
After the break, we talked to a former Sun editor about Rupert Murdoch's new attempt to arrange a full takeover of Sky and how Disney helped a wordless autistic boy rediscover the power of speech.
Now, Rupert Murdoch has made a renewed bid for full control of the broadcaster Sky, 5 years after abandoning his last attempt at the height of the phone hacking scandal. His 21st Century Fox Corporation, which already owns 39% of Sky, has bid £18 billion for the rest of the company, sending Sky's shares soaring. Murdoch's News Corp gave up its plan to buy Sky in 2011 after a public and political backlash over his newspaper's hacking phones. Well, I'm joined now by David Yelland, who's a former editor of the Murdoch-owned Sun newspaper and senior vice president at News Corp in New York. He now runs a communications company. So Murdoch's having to pay $10 billion more than the last bid. Why is he doing it?
Well, given the share price movement at Sky over the last year, given where the dollar is against sterling, and given the fact they tried 5 years ago, I think this is not a surprise at all. I mean, it's been inevitable for some time. I think
But
the timing.
why does he want to do it?
Because the media world is consolidating again. I mean, we've seen AT&T acquire Time Warner, which indeed Rupert wanted to acquire himself at one point. And you're either if you're the top two or three, you need to acquire or you die, basically.
Right. I mean, there were significant objections last time, both political and in terms of media dominance.
Yeah.
Do you think it's different now, given that the newspapers and the Sky stake are no longer part of the same company?
Yeah, I think it is different. I don't detect, actually, any huge negativity. If you look online at the moment, even The Guardian is pretty straight-laced about it. It's early days, obviously.
Well, Labour MPs are pretty exercised, though, aren't they?
Yeah, but I don't think the Labour Party is in any states to stop anything at the moment. But the more important, the substantive point is that the newspapers are in a different company. They've got all their ducks in a row this time. The boards of 21st Century and Sky have agreed the price. Right, so that didn't happen last time. Last time it drifted more than 12 months, and then we had the hacking stuff, which sort of ended. It wasn't in a good state even before the hacking thing started. So I don't see. I think this is, it's going to end with a whimper, not a bang.
But I mean, the hacking stuff, as you put it,
Yeah.
I mean, that's what really killed it last time. And people still remember that. That is still a real factor, isn't it?
Of course they remember it, but, things move on very fast. I mean, this year, look what's happened this year, I mean, I think that is in the past.
Well, the victims of hacking might not say that things
I'm
have
sure they
moved
wouldn't,
on.
and they're quite right too, and I wouldn't if I was in their position. But it is in the past.
I mean, a lot of the political controversy last time was over the sort of coziness with the Cameron government and the Murdoch empire.
Yeah.
Is there that closeness now with Theresa May's government and Murdoch's companies?
I don't think that's the issue, actually. I think, this is a company that, love him or hate him, Rupert set up in '89. It's nearly 30 years ago now, 28 years, I think, from nothing, right? So without him and without the team at the time, there wouldn't be a Sky. So is the British government really going to say, you can only own 39% of a company that you sort of invented? I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think it changes plurality very much at all, actually.
So what does it mean for Sky News? I mean, does it become Fox News, do you think?
I don't think so, no. I think, I don't think there'll be any change there.
David Yelland, thank you very much for coming and joining us. Matt.
Thanks, Kathy. Now, we're all familiar with film classics like Peter Pan and The Lion King, but Owen Suskind from Massachusetts in the States took devotion to a whole new level. As a young child, he developed autism. For years, he would barely speak to his parents until they discovered they could communicate with him by talking as characters from his favorite Disney films. Our science editor, Tom Clark, has this remarkable story.
Fighting with swords in the leaves.
This is Owen Suskind in 1993.
I'm Peter Pan, and you
An outwardly normal toddler in the back garden of his Massachusetts home. playing with his dad, journalist Ron Suskind. A few months later, though, Owen withdrew into himself, lost his coordination and stopped talking altogether. He was diagnosed as autistic and remained totally withdrawn, obsessed only with watching animated Disney films. But then, when he was 6 years old, his parents noticed he was repeating lines from his favourite movies. It was a breakthrough moment. His dad decided to pick up a favourite Disney puppet and imitate the voice of the character.
I grabbed Iago the puppet.
Yeah.
I pulled it up to my elbow and I said, Owen, how does it feel to be you?
I say not good because I don't have any friends.
And it was hard for me to hear that. But what I did, as I stayed in character, kept talking as the puppet, and I said, when did you and I become such good friends?
When I first watched Aladdin.
And we start to talk just like that. And about 2 minutes in, this is our first conversation since he's 2 years old, 4 years of silence almost. And Owen, after a few minutes, all of a sudden clears his throat and answers me as who?
The evil Jafar.
And what does Jafar say?
I love the way your foul little mind works.
I love the way your foul little mind works. And at that moment, we said, we're speaking in Disney dialogue. This is the key. And a world opened up to us.
The family went from having a child with whom they hadn't communicated in years to one they could speak with clearly, albeit in the voices of the princesses, wizards and villains from 50 animated classics their son had memorised entirely.
Every person who knows someone with autism knows they have these powerful passions. They were often called restricted interests over the decades. And mostly they were seen as prisons, obsessions. We realized they were pathways. The key is you had to get in there and live in there with them. And once we entered Owen's underground cavern of Disney, we met him there. Yeah. And we enjoyed all of the emotions, especially love.
The documentary about their experience, Life Animated, opens in the UK today. It explores how, by working with Owen's passions, his family found a way to equip him better for adulthood. Because obsessive traits are common to many autistic people, it's receiving a lot of interest.
Traditionally, approaches are always trying to change the individual, trying to make them fit into society, essentially in some respects make them normal. And I think people are starting to realise that that's maybe not the way that we should be doing things, but this is a real way potential way to connect.
We joined Owen and his brother Walt at this screening event they organised in London for a group of autistic children and young adults. He encourages others to embrace their passions by talking about his own, the lives and voices of Disney sidekicks.
Oh, young master, one day you will be king. Then you can chase all those stupid mangy poachers from dawn until dusk.
That's a beautiful one.
The Suskinds aren't claiming that communicating with their son through his passion for movies has changed or alleviated his autism, but it gave them a pathway from our world into his.
Now, why don't you finish with a little Merlin and Arthur, because we are, after all, in Britain.
You know, boy, that law business is a powerful thing.
Greater than gravity? Well, yes, boy, in its way. Yes,
I'd say it's the greatest force on earth.
And have you felt love here in the UK?
Yes, I have.
That remarkable story by Tom Clark. Now, some breaking news. The Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, has promised to stick up for our friends and partners in the Gulf in a speech in Bahrain. It follows his critical comments over the role of Saudi Arabia's involvement in what he called proxy wars, which earned him a rebuke from Number 10.
We'll be back tomorrow at 6:30.
Have a wonderful weekend. Thanks for watching.
But let's end tonight with marking the passing of a man who made history, John Glenn, who's died aged 95, the first American to orbit the Earth.
Godspeed, John Glenn. 10, 9, 8, 7.
100 miles.